I had been given this advice from an ornithologist. He had said, firstly, it doesn't matter if you don't save this bird because they're common. And that just kicked in, this idea of my life not really being worth anything and sort of forgotten about. It's like, no way. The species might be common as a whole, but this individual bird only has one life, and I'm going to do everything I can to save that one life. I was just running around turning light switches off and things, but to an obsessive degree. If I didn't do it, it made me have a sort of panic attack. The more time I spent on my own, the more vulnerable and awkward I became. And I found one fledgling, one little tiny little thing, and this fledgling had his head bowed and his eyes shut, and he was shaking. It's very, very difficult to look after wild animals, and it's always better if the parents can do it themselves. But by dusk, I knew the cobras would come and eat it. You wouldn't survive the night. I was accepted almost instantaneously as a surrogate mother to this finch. Because suddenly I saw how these animals belong to a place, and I had felt so out of place in this country, and then suddenly I felt like I was home. He flew high and strong. When I heard the news, I sort of just stared upwards and thought of this bird who had become such a part of who I am. He had redefined my identity. He had changed my outlook on life. It was the most incredible satisfaction of, the proudest moment in my life.